I take this time to speak on the floor of the United States Senate to express my disappointment in last week's district court decision on the Cardin-Lugar provision of on the SEC rule. An amendment offered by Senator Lugar and I on the Dodd-Frank legislation imposed certain transparencies on extractive industries. It was a pretty simple provision. It said that those companies that are registered on the SEC that are involved in extraction of minerals would be required to disclose on a project-by-project basis the details of those contracts. We did that for many reasons. We did it because we thought transparency is right. We did it in order to deal with energy security, so that we know the type of contracts that are being entered into. We did it so investors would have information in order to decide whether they wanted to invest in the stock. And the United States has been on the forefront of transparency, and this decision will delay implementation of a vital transparency rule that will shine much needed sunlight on information designed to protect investors and to promote U.S. energy security. The Cardin-Lugar Amendment and the SEC rule are critical to achieving important U.S. policy objectives. These objectives include protecting the United States' interests in both national and energy security. Now, why do I say that? Well, by having transparency on what the extractive industries are doing, it makes it more likely that we'll have stable energy sources globally. Stable energy sources are critically important to our national security interests. These provisions are important for our national security. It also ensures investors' awareness and protection. If you're going to invest in a stock of an oil company or another mineral company, you have the right to know where they're doing business. You have the right to know what countries they're doing business and the specific contracts that they entered into. So you can make the right decision as an investor. That's why the SEC rules make sense. And lastly, it promotes American core principles of transparency, integrity, and good governance worldwide. It's interesting, we sometimes talk about the mineral wealth of a country as being a resource curse. Because although they have wealth, that wealth is taken by the elite of the country and used to finance corruption, adding to the misery of the people. So some of the wealthiest nations that exist, as far as minerals are concerned, have some of the greatest poverty in the world. Well, the provision that Senator Lugar and I co-authored was an attempt to deal with that and to deal with good governance. If we can trace the money, we have a better chance to end corruption, to develop good governance and more stable regimes. The district court ruling of API versus SEC that sends the rule back to the SEC is disappointing. The rule is flawed because the court completely misread not only the statute, but the clear congressional desire of the statute. The statute provision was for transparency. And yet the the court's ruling strikes down the SEC rule that implements that transparency. The courts spent a tremendous amount of time addressing the issue of public disclosure of the company reports. The whole purpose of Section 1504 is to provide transparency to investors and citizens about payments made to government. Why would Congress write a law to increase transparency for investors and then allow the SEC to keep these reports secret? Congress was clear in the letter and the spirit of the law that this information should be in the public domain. On the issue of the host country exception, over the very lengthy comment period for the rule of the SEC was not presented with one concrete example from industry about a specific law or contract that would prohibit these types of disclosures. In fact, examples are to the contrary, including the fact that companies such as Norwegian oil giant Statoil regularly reports their payments to countries like Angola and China, where industry says prohibits such disclosure, yet that company had no negative repercussions. The API is trying to muddy the waters by having the SEC address problems that the industry has failed to prove exist. The United States has been a leader on transparency in the extractive industries. And it's the district court that has now put a hurdle on that transparency. That the district court decision is not only contrary to the law, it's contrary to what is happening globally today. The EU has already enacted a law requiring the same payment disclosure that Section 1504 requires on a project and company level without exceptions. And at its summit last month, the G8 issued a communique unequivocally backing mandatory disclosure. Canada has said it will develop mandatory disclosures in 2 years, and the Canadian mining industry endorsed that provision. Despite the oil companies' continued fight in the U.S. court, the overwhelming momentum is on the side of mandatory disclosure. Why? Because of national security. Why? Because investors have a right to know. Why? Because it's the right thing for good governance. And despite this setback, let me make it clear, we will not give up. This law still stands, and the SEC has many options to appeal the decision or revise the rule. The SEC must make sure that it finishes the job. As Senator Levin and Senator Lugar and I stated in our amicus brief in this case, resource companies can believe whatever they wish and make whatever communications they wish about their payments to foreign governments. The resource curse or the benefit or cost of transparency, they have done so throughout the process. What resource companies may not do is impede the power of the legislative branch to require disclosure of objective information to fulfill compelling public policy objectives, including the strengthening of America's national and energy security and investor protections. Madam President, it's exactly what that provision did. Congress exercised its right as the legislative branch to require transparency for good public reasons. Members of Congress and administration on a bipartisan basis have long supported transparency through comprehensive disclosure of payments made by resource companies. That support will continue as we work with the SEC to implement this important law.